Hello, and welcome to the From Nature to Nurture podcast. I am your host, Danielle, and today is the 10th episode. Today, we are talking all about Holy Basil or Tulsi, and I know I say this a lot, but it's one of my favorite plants. The thing is, the longer you work with plants, you develop these really rich, deep relationships. And Tulsi is one that I have really connected with this year, specifically in 2025. But I started growing it 2 years ago. So I have been working with it hands on, live, in person, fresh for a few years. And I feel like working with a plant in its peak health and through all of its life cycles really contributes to having a much deeper relationship. Yes, you can still build a beautiful, rich relationship with a plant that you have only purchased dried or not grown yourself, but there's something different and magical that happens when you plant the seeds, you watch your little plant grow, you harvest it throughout the season, you see the pollinators loving on it, and you watch it through its whole life cycle where it sprouts, flourishes, and dies back over and over for a few years. And Tulsi is one of those plants for me. So, today's episode is going to be all about the physical medicine of Tulsi, and then the next episode that comes out will be all about the folklore, which, if you've been here a while or you've come to any of my classes, you know that I put just as much importance on folklore as on the physical medicine. So, let's get going. So, as a reminder, I'm going to go over a few herbal terms before we dive deep in. So, first we have energetics of a plant. Now, that is how the plant tastes, feels kind of in your body. So, that is going to cover the taste, the temperature, and the moisture content, and its tonality. So, if it is a tightening, tonifying plant, or if it's a relaxing, loosening plant. Then we have our herbal actions. Our herbal actions tell us how the herb acts in our body. One that we kind of know, most people kind of recognize would be like a diuretic or a nootropic, something like that, where it's telling us how that plant affects our physical body and how it can help us. Now, often you will see the energetics and the herbal actions match up because we know some different correlations that are super common. So, for example, if you have a drying plant, then it's also going to be a diuretic. So, different things like that. So today we're talking about Tulsi. Now the common name is Holy Basil, which is probably what you recognize more. And then the Latin names are Ocimum sanctum and Ocimum tenuiflorum. Now it has two different Latin names, but it's not two different types of plants. It's just one was created and then one came along later. I believe the I'm not entirely sure, but this is kind of what I remember roughly is that when you call it Ocimum sanctum, that is when you're using it in ritual, versus Ocimum tenuiflorum is when you're using it more for the physical, just like medicine type, versus like I said, like in more of a ritual, because Tulsi has a beautiful long-standing tradition of being used in different rituals, which is not for this podcast, that's for the next podcast. But something that's really unique about Tulsi is that we have these little kind of sub Tulsis where they look different, but they're worked with exactly the same. So we have Rama Tulsi, which is very green, has like bright green leaves. And then we have Krishna Tulsi, which is the same but has more purple in the leaves. And then we also have Vana Tulsi, which actually is a whole different Tulsi. That is Ocimum gratissimum, which is more of a tree version of Tulsi instead of a like little plant. But the tree version is not one that you will very often find for purchase. That's just one that grows wild in India. So it's more so worked with over there, not over in the West. Now, when we start looking at the medicine of Tulsi, it has a lot of beautiful benefits that can be worked with throughout multiple veins of your health. But for me, Tulsi is a daily plant for a lot of these benefits. So first, let's talk about the energetics. So it is pungent and bitter and a little slightly sweet. It is warming, drying, and relaxing. So as we're kind of going through the rest of this podcast and through the rest of your herbal studies, like I said, the energetics are often mirrored in the herbal actions. So like I said, we hear drying, we know that it's a diuretic. There's some different combinations here that you'll start to see some correlations with. So when we are looking at the herbal actions of Tulsi, we have two main herbal actions that you will see this plant most recommended for working with. So first we have that it is an adaptogen. Now, if you don't know what that is, an adaptogen helps our body to adapt to stress, helps us build a greater emotional resilience by regulating our stress hormone production. And there are different subcategories of adaptogens. So we have uplifting, relaxing, and neutral adaptogens. Now, they're all going to kind of give you the same feeling overall, but it makes some a little bit more appropriate for daytime use versus nighttime use, or, depending on if you need a little bit more energy to be able to handle your stress, or if you need to be able to relax and come down from your stress. Kind of just depends on your situation. Now, adaptogens in general should not be worked with long term because they will kind of burn out your stress response and you don't want to become reliant on them. However, there are some adaptogens that are much more mild and can be worked with over longer term, like reishi or like Tulsi, like what we're talking about today. So Tulsi has this beautiful ability to be able to help us handle more stress. It helps lend us a little bit more of like energy and vigor to be able to overcome and not get bogged down or overwhelmed. Normally, adaptogens are worked with during times of high stress, not regular daily stress. But like I said, reishi, tulsi, more gentle adaptogens like that are appropriate for everyday long-term use. I work with tulsi on a very regular basis, and for me, tulsi feels a little bit more uplifting. Now, you can also work with tulsi for sleep, which we'll talk about in a minute, but for me, it kind of gives me that driving down a back road, windows down, blasting my favorite song, like feeling good kind of vibes. So in higher doses, it can be more relaxing. In lower doses, it's a little bit more energizing. Now, that second main herbal action that it has is that is a nootropic, which kind of goes hand in hand with this adaptogen ability. So nootropics help to improve our cognitive function, and kind of boost our focus, memory, recall, concentration, and helps drive more blood flow to the brain to help nourish and protect the nerves in our brain. So why an adaptogen quality can kind of help with the nootropic quality is because sometimes we can't focus and we are really tense because of whatever, and so we kind of lose that cognitive ability to be able to kind of work through things. So these two herbal actions together become a great study aid or focus aid for getting bigger projects done, because kind of lowering that stress and anxiety, but also stimulating the physical nourishment of your brain at the same time. Now, I already mentioned this briefly, but Tulsi is also a nervine sedative, so smaller amounts can help with daily stress and anxiety and be appropriate for daytime use, or you can take a higher dose of like a tincture for sleep. Can also help with mental tension and ease your muscles. So moving on to some different herbal actions. Um, Tulsi is also a carminative. So carminatives are kind of like the warming side of bitters. So it works the same way as bitters to help stimulate our digestion so that we can um, assimilate our nutrients better and help to relieve any stomach issues that come from digestion. It's also antispasmodic, so it can help with cramps, spasms, gas, and has an affinity for the stomach. It is also a diaphoretic and circulatory stimulant. So diaphoretics help to open our pores and kind of bring that heat to the surface to help us break a fever and to kind of help protect our internal organs from heat damage from a high fever. And then the circulatory stimulant makes sense. This is one of those where a lot of them are kind of tied together, where nootropics and circulatory stimulants go hand in hand because it's all about that blood flow, right? So even outside of our brain, though, it is helping to relax our capillary beds and increase our circulation. So it's going to help with our fine motor skills by, keeping our hands and feet feeling good, and helping our blood to continue to flow throughout our whole body, since our blood is kind of our life force and keeps us alive. Tulsi is also a antiviral, antibacterial, and inflammatory modulation plant, which can help with a wide range from coughs, colds, flus, and general feeling of unwell. Tulsi also has an affinity for the upper respiratory tract, and this would be helpful for infections. Tulsi is also a blood sugar regulator. So this is specific for type 2 diabetes. There has been some studies around Tulsi being able to support our adrenal glands. And along with that nervine and adaptogen pair, we have that Tulsi is going to help with lowering stress and regulating our stress hormones, which is really important for insulin resistance. So overall, you can see that this is a wonderful plant for the brain and for your emotional regulation. One thing that I really like about this plant is that it kind of helps to stoke the fire of the mind and body, which is wonderful for brain fog. And there have been some studies around Tulsi helping with some of that mental fog and confusion from excessive cannabis use, which is a really interesting correlation there, and it makes a lot of sense with that nootropic and that nervine kind of combination. Also, if you've heard of David Winston, he is a wonderful, very famous herbalist, and he likes to work with Tulsi for what he calls stagnant depression, which in this case he calls stagnant depression as situational depression. So not long term, not chronic. These are, you just lost someone, you're going through a breakup, you are going through some big life change where you have some situational depression around. And so Tulsi kind of helps to uplift and bring you that stress relief while also stimulating your brain so that you can kind of think your way out of the depression in a way. Now, in terms of working with Tulsi, it is considered safe for long-standing use and generally considered safe for most people. The caveat to that being because of the circulatory stimulant affinity, you would want to stop it at least 2 weeks before surgery because it can slow your blood clotting. And then you'd want to avoid taking it if you're on anticoagulants or antiplatelet drugs. Now let's talk about what you can make with Tulsi. Now, Tulsi can be worked with in a multitude of ways, from strict medicine to more of like a food as medicine situation. So I primarily work with Tulsi as a tea or a tincture. So for your tea infusion, you would use 1 tablespoon of dried herb to 8 ounces of water and steep it covered for 15 to 30 minutes. As a tincture, you would work with it fresh at a 1 to 2 ratio for 75% alcohol. 1 to 2 ratio meaning 1 part plant, so like 1 cup of plants to 2 cups of alcohol, for example. Or dried at a 1 to 5 ratio at 50% alcohol. And then you would just work with it as needed, start small, and then slowly increase. I will say the one thing that I have noticed is that sometimes, depending on kind of what else I've ingested throughout the day and what else is going on. Sometimes Tulsi can be too stimulating for me in the evening because of that circulatory stimulant and nootropic ability. But you can balance that out if you want to work with Tulsi, like I said, for sleep, which you absolutely can. Everyone's a little different, but you can also balance that out by adding in some more specific sleep plants, maybe something a little stronger, and make a little blend that way. But you can also work with Tulsi as a suckus or a juice. So you would juice it, and then you would do a 3-to-1 juice combo with 95% alcohol. You let it sit for 3 days, and then you filter out the cheesecloth or paper. This is a traditional preparation for working with fresh Tulsi. And you can also make it into a syrup, which is a really fun way. If you have heard of Rosalie de la Forêt, she has a book called Alchemy of Herbs, and she has some really cool Tulsi recipes, like Tulsi and ginger syrup, and kind of making like Tulsi mint juleps, kind of, which is really cool. But the taste is very polarizing. I feel like some people love the taste of Tulsi and some people don't. So before you start making something that takes a lot of time, like a syrup or a tincture, I would say start with a cup of infusion, see how you like it, and also try the two different main types of Tulsi, like the Rama or the Krishna. For me, I feel like the Krishna is more spicy and the Rama is a little bit more sweet. I have grown both and I still work with both, and I don't really have a preference between them, but that could also change what you mix with it, right? So I always recommend starting with just a simple tea to be able to feel the plant working, taste the plant, really get to know it hands-on. So that is Tulsi. I hope that you learned a lot in this podcast and that you found a new herbal ally. Tulsi is this beautiful plant that can be worked with in a myriad of ways, and it's just a wonderful, gentle daily support to help you feel your best. It's truly one of my go-tos, especially with these seasonal transitions like we are currently during this recording, we are just starting fall, and it is a wonderful grounding, balancing plant to kind of help with those seasonal transitions that can get a little rough for our nervous system. So in a few weeks, we will have the folklore and stories and rituals about Tulsi podcast. But for now, if you start to work with Tulsi in a medicinal capacity, or if you have your own personal history with working with this plant, I would love to hear about it. You can send me an email or send me a message on Instagram or Facebook. And I hope that you find a way to work with this plant that truly nourishes you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you would like to learn more about my services and classes, you can find me at rootandwandercollective.com, and I'll see you along the plant path.